In the first part of this episode, we examine the ways in which wartime propaganda, and specifically comic book covers, dealt with home front topics such as war bonds and stamps, scrap collection, and rationing. These were all activities in which young comic book readers could participate or which affected them directly in their daily lives. The second part of this episode shall focus on additional areas of the home front, including victory gardens and farm labor, civil defense, charitable organizations such as the Red Cross and the USO, the importance of industrial production, and the threat of enemy saboteurs. One home front activity which was accessible to all ages was the cultivation of a victory garden. Victory gardens were home vegetable gardens which supplemented a family's food supply, helped citizens feel they were contributing to the war effort, and freed up an equivalent amount of commercially grown food for use by the armed forces. Wartime propaganda, including animated cartoons and comic books, helped popularize the victory garden concept. However, because victory gardens weren't exactly visually or dramatically exciting, only a handful of comic books featured victory gardens on their covers. World's Finest was a sort of all-star DC comic featuring the publisher's biggest stars, Superman and Batman, along with secondary characters such as Green Arrow. Issued quarterly, 7 of the 11 covers from spring 1942 through autumn 1944 were war-oriented, including number 11, autumn 1943. In a nicely drawn cover by Jack Burnley, Superman, Batman, and Robin are shown working in a victory garden. It's hard work, as Robin would attest, but the result is a bumper crop of vegetables. This cover reinforces the attitude that the Victory Garden program is not only so important that superheroes themselves participate in it, but also that there are material rewards at the end of the growing season. Animal Comics number 4, dated August-September 1943, depicts Sammy and Susie Littletail inadvertently sabotaging Uncle Wiggily's victory garden. Pests attacking victory gardens are a repeated motif in comics and animated cartoons. The cover of Blue Bolt number 36 from May 1943 shows a crow and a rabbit anticipating the vegetables that the victory garden of characters Crisco and Jasper will eventually produce. This cover was drawn by Jack Warren. Artist Booty Rogers was responsible for the humorous cover of 1944's Sparky Watts number 4. In addition to the super strong title character, here employed as a human plow horse, the art also features his big-footed friend Slap Happy and their young Chinese stereotype pal, Yoo-Hoo. Notice the Buy United States War Bonds and Stamps poster on their garden fence, giving this cover a 2-for-1 propaganda message. While victory gardens were usually part-time family or community projects, farm labor in general was important on the home front. There was a propaganda campaign to encourage people to work on farms as part of the war effort, replacing farmhands who were now in the armed forces or working in heavy industry. The United States Crop Corps was formed to facilitate this program. The Women's Land Army was part of the Crop Corps, probably inspired by a similar wartime organization in England. School children were also encouraged to become Victory Farm volunteers during their spring and summer vacations. This means of contributing to the war effort was featured in various films and in a number of comic book stories, but once again the limited dramatic or humorous aspects of the topic meant it did not lend itself to cover art, with a few exceptions. Super Snipe was a series about a young boy who read comic books and dreamed of becoming a superhero and having exciting adventures. The cover of Super Snipe Volume 2, Number 10 shows him in real life reading about the farm labor shortage, and also as his super alter ego helping a gray-haired farmer plant his crops. 4 Color Comics reprinted newspaper comic strips in comic book format. Issue number 18 contains a long story about Little Orphan Annie and her junior commandos who contribute to the war effort on the home front. The cover is interesting because rather than emphasizing the usual activities such as selling war bonds or collecting scrap, Annie and her pals, wearing civil defense style helmets emblazoned with JC for Junior Commandos, are clearly marching off to become involved in some agricultural enterprise given the garden tools they are carrying. Mary Marvel was one of the spin-off characters from Fawcett's Captain Marvel series. The cover of WOW Comics number 11 from March 1943 is an all-encompassing tribute to the contributions of women to the war effort. Significantly, in addition to the women in military uniform, a nurse, and several factory workers, a woman farm worker is prominently depicted. This reiterates the government's message that farm work was as vital to the war effort as factory work, and that the home front was crucial to the support of men and women involved in the actual prosecution of the war overseas. For those who couldn't serve in the armed forces, work in war plants, or hold another directly war-oriented job, there were ample opportunities for volunteerism on the home front. Civil defense workers were responsible for enforcing the blackout and maintaining order in the event of enemy air raids, among other duties. Although this was a position of responsibility, for some reason popular media enjoyed poking fun at air raid wardens and other civil defense workers, depicting them as clumsy, officious, and not very useful. Fortunately, the United States mainland was never seriously attacked during the war. Examples of civil defense activities used for comedic effect include Feature Comics number 61, as Lollapalooza's brother Vincent gets extremely overzealous in his attempt to enforce the blackout, with cover art by Gil Fox on this October 1942 issue. The Face was a war correspondent who occasionally wore a fright mask to fight crime. On the cover of The Face Comics number 2, he startles an air raid warden. King Comics was another publication that reprinted newspaper comic strips. Issue number 88 depicts Wimpy from the Popeye series as an air raid warden. Given his well-known fondness for hamburgers, Wimpy is apparently attempting to protect a reluctant cow, a future source of this delicacy, from possible injury in an air raid. Sparky Watts number 2 significantly makes the dim-witted slap-happy character the air raid warden, rather than assigning this role to the more normal Sparky Watts. This cover contains some contrasting messages, showing the humorous side of air raid preparations, while at the same time suggesting they are important enough to be observed by the general population. Actually, as the war went on and it became clear the United States mainland was not going to be attacked by the enemy, such preparedness was largely discarded. Other organizations fared better in the popular media than the Office of Civil Defense. The Red Cross was generally appreciated for its efforts, including the blood drives and first aid classes it sponsored. The cover of Target Comics Volume 6, Number 3 from May 1945 is unusual because it does not feature any continuing characters from the comic book itself. Instead, Tom Gill drew a soldier bringing a wounded comrade to a nurse for assistance. This is presumably an allegory rather than an attempt to realistically portray medical practices in combat zones, and the large text urging readers to give to the Red Cross supports this theory. The cover of Target Volume 3, Number 6, dated August 1942, also incorporates a plug for the Red Cross, in addition to encouraging readers to buy war bonds and stamps. The cover of America's Best number 12 depicts the superheroes of the Standard Comics line, Pyro-Man, the Black Terror, American Eagle, and Doc Strange, lined up to donate blood to the Red Cross. Another cover showing superheroes setting a good example for comic book readers by their participation in home front activities. Comic book publishers also supported the Red Cross by making appeals for support on their covers, even if the covers themselves were not directly related to the topic. For example, Star Spangled Comics number 43 shows enemy saboteurs preparing to attack an American factory with a flying robot bomb. but the Red Cross emblem and a request for support are prominently displayed in the upper right quadrant of the cover. The United Service Organization and various servicemen's canteens provided entertainment for troops, a valuable contribution to the war effort. Films such as Stage Door Canteen and Hollywood Canteen recreated the ambiance in real-life centers and depicted the efforts of the USO and other groups to entertain servicemen. Comic books also pledged their support to these worthwhile activities. The cover of Star Spangled No. 33 depicts the Newsboy Legion and their costumed mentor, the Guardian, as they run their own canteen for soldiers, sailors, and airmen. The various uniformed figures include an obviously foreign sailor, possibly Free French, in the doorway. Big Shot Comics No. 35 features its stars, Joe Palooka, Dixie Dugan, Sparky Watts, superhero Skyman, and The Face, on their way to a USO show for service personnel. The cover also includes a rationing gag, as the Face's scary mask is used to inspire a horse to greater speed, thus obviating the need for ration gasoline and an automobile. WOW Comics No. 22 shows pert Mary Marvel leading a USO-sponsored sing-along attended by representatives of the various branches of the American Armed Forces. The majority of those who read comic books were not old enough to take full-time jobs, and in fact there was a government campaign to convince teenagers to stay in school rather than dropping out to join the armed forces or to work in a factory. However, wartime comic books did pay tribute to the industrial workers of America, whose contributions were considered vitally important to the war effort. The cover of Bill Barnes' America's Air Ace, No. 12, dated October 1943, is dedicated to America's war workers. Since this comic was nominally aviation-oriented, the companies identified in the background include airplane manufacturers Boeing, Lockheed, and Curtiss-Wright. Images of the workers and their work are also displayed, along with an Army E pennant given to factories for excellence in production. The art in the foreground features some bestial-looking enemy soldiers being strafed by two American warplanes. On the right is the distinctive P-38 Lightning made by Lockheed, while the aircraft on the left somewhat resembles a Vindicator dive bomber. For Favorites No. 3, dated January 1942, combines the V motif, including the 3 dots and dash Morse code, with images of American might, industry, agriculture, natural resources, scientific achievement, and the armed forces. The cover of Jackpot Comics No. 5 is also rather allegorical, showing a giant gear labeled U.S. production grinding down Mussolini, Hirohito, and Hitler. At the top of the drawing, a B-25 Mitchell bomber, a tank, and a piece of artillery serve as examples of the weaponry produced in the United States. As we have seen earlier, comic books like to depict superheroes participating in home front activities so readers would understand how important such work was. Blue Beetle himself is dressed as a factory worker on the cover of Blue Beetle No. 25. Ironically, although this comic was dated September 1943, the Minuteman Bonds poster seen behind the hero is the pre-war Savings Bonds version, not the For Victory War Bonds poster that replaced it in mid-1942. Action Comics 55 depicts Superman helping build a bomber against a backdrop signifying the scope of war industry. The Fighting Yank, Black Terror, and Doc Strange also chip in to repair a damaged airplane on the cover of America's Best No. 16. Since factory work in and of itself wasn't that dramatic or exciting, popular culture often depicted war plants under attack by enemy saboteurs. Comic books followed suit, with the titles superheroes coming to the defense of the nation. Shipbuilding was a very visible symbol of America's industrial might during World War II. Henry J. Kaiser and the Liberty Ship program were frequently referenced in popular culture. The cover of Submariner Comics number 3 from fall of 1941 depicts the aquatic superhero thrashing some villains who are trying to stop the launching of a Lend-Lease ship intended for Britain. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, stylishly outfitted in a yellow suit and wearing his trademark hat and smoking his trademark cigar, is oblivious to the struggle as he christens the new vessel. Steel Sterling and the Web foil a joint Nazi-Japanese attack on a shipyard on the cover of Zip Comics number 35. Shipyard Sabotage is the topic of the cover of Captain Marvel Comics number 22. The villain isn't specifically identified as an Axis agent, but I mean, who else would want to destroy a ship during wartime? The traditional round, black, bowling ball style anarchist bomb is a nice touch, though. The saboteur confronting Green Lantern on the cover of All-American Comics number 48 brandishes what appears to be a German potato masher grenade. Not exactly a major threat to the gigantic warship under construction in the background, but I suppose it's the evil thought that counts. In contrast, the Axis agent on the cover of Green Hornet number 12 has somehow managed to convey a huge spiked magnetic mine to the top of the scaffolding overlooking an aircraft carrier in a shipyard. The Green Hornet reminds us that American production for victory must not be stopped, but he had better step lively if he wants to prevent that mine from wreaking havoc far below. The Green Hornet was also pressed into service to protect war plants on the covers of Green Hornet number 21 and number 22, as well as an aluminum mine on the cover of Green Hornet Comics number 14. Of course, enemy saboteurs didn't exclusively target defense plants. They also went after the nation's water supply, oil fields, Boulder Dam, and even national monuments. The contribution of women to the war effort was a major focus of wartime propaganda, of particular interest because it provided a clear demonstration of how gender roles were being redefined by the war, was the participation of women in factory work. The iconic Rosie the Riveter is still remembered today. Beginning in 1943, WOW Comics already had something of a feminist slant since it was the home of Mary Marvel, Fawcett's preeminent superheroine. The cover of WOW Comics number 11, dated March 1943, shows Mary along with the other super women who were working for the war effort, including several factory workers, a farm worker, a nurse, a member of the armed forces, and so on. Top Notch Laugh Comics number 45 was slightly less reverent, depicting the scatterbrained Susie, who had a different occupation in each issue, as a defense industry worker apparently about to carelessly provoke a horrific explosion. How humorous. Don't forget to watch the first part of episode 6 of Deconstructing Propaganda and the previous 5 episodes as well. And stay tuned for episode 7 coming soon.